Several things make this recipe stand out as extraordinary. First, it delivers a taste and a texture that we don't expect from duck. Even if you use a domestic farm-raised duck, the seasoning and flavors deliver the gamey taste of wild duck. Second, we're used to duck having a thick, crunchy skin, but this has a beautiful, delicate, thin skin. It's not the least bit greasy, yet still rich and intensely flavored. In short, it surprises you with flavors that you don't expect from a duck. Ideally, you would serve this as part of a larger plate with a theme such as Duck Three Ways, with this element being the most technically difficult and time-consuming, as you'll see. To fry these walnuts, I'm going to actually use walnut oil. That's a couple tablespoons. It's okay, we're also going to use the walnut oil. After the walnuts are cooked, we're going to cook the onions in the same pan. And this should only take about 3-4 minutes, something like that, before you've got enough color on them. You have to make sure that they don't burn, you know. Burning nuts on when you're toasting was like the classic mistake to make for everybody who's even experienced cooks, because they go from being not cooked enough to being burnt in about 30 seconds, so you really have to watch them. And also, you have to look at the color of them. You can see them darkening. It means they're getting very close. And looking at the time now, they've been in there about 3 minutes right now. Okay, I'm going to call these finished. Now into the same pan, 60 grams of onion. And we'll drain a little bit of this walnut oil back into the pan. Now, cooking this onion, I've turned the heat way down to like 3.5. I'm also going to add about a teaspoon of sugar and a little bit of salt to help break up the onion. The sugar, I want it to caramelize. I want these onions to be a little bit sweet because of the final application here. Okay, they've been cooking for about 5 minutes now, and I'm going to add 1 clove of sliced garlic to them. This is the reason I'm not adding it sooner is I don't want the garlic to be burnt in any way, and I'm not looking to really brown these onions either. I just want to kind of sweat them a little bit, get them started. So I'm going to let this sit in the pan for another about 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to let it begin cooling down. Actually, what else I can do now is I can add those walnuts back in, and then this whole mixture is just going to get put off to the side to cool down while I make while I prepare the duck. You don't use a really giant duck leg for this, because that means the duck was older, it will be very tough, and you'll end up with, no matter what you do, it'll be stringy. So the first step is to French the leg. This is the exact same method you would do with chicken leg. If you watched my other video, then you know how to do this. You peel this off. First step. Don't be too rough on it, otherwise you'll break the bone. They can be a little bit slippery at the end here, but okay, I'll clean this off with a knife in a second. Now you've got these tendons here that run into the meat, and you got to pull them out. Again, it's exactly like the chicken. Okay. This thing's giving me problems, so I'm just going to go ahead and take it off with a knife. Usually I could just tear it off, but the tendons that run through the duck leg are a lot tougher than the ones that go through a chicken leg, so you may have difficulty pulling these out with your bare fingers. You can use a pair of pliers to help you. It's a little bit of a tedious process, but it's worth it because the end result will be really good. You won't have any of those tough bits that you're used to having in leg meat. We're just going to get rid of all of them this way. And after a couple of minutes, you get them all out of there. Now you've got to flip it over, and we've got to remove the bones. So we've got this bone that runs along here, and the easiest way, again, like when I showed you how to debone the chicken thigh, it's the same sort of thing. You just want to work your finger in there, get it down under the bone, and lift it up. Once you begin separating it, just scrape off a little bit of the meat down the bone here to get access to the joint. Then bend the joint backwards. You can hear it pop. There we go. And you begin working the knife down a little bit here. Also, now we've got the skin to peel back. And this is going to be a little bit more difficult than with chicken skin. You're going to have to be a little bit more careful to not rupture the whole thing, because duck skin is attached much better to the meat than chicken skin is. So you're going to have to be a little bit more careful here. You can't just peel the whole thing back like you can on chicken. You're going to have to actually work it back a little bit at a time here. And just keep working, and I got this bone out, I got the knuckle out, I found a few more pieces of tendon, and just keep exploring it. Now we get it to this point where it's basically just this one bone that's in the middle here. Now we have to begin what I consider the hardest part, because you have to get the meat off of the skin as cleanly as you can without cutting the skin. And like I said, duck meat is not like working with chicken meat. You're going to have to be careful. You scrape it, use a really sharp knife and scrape it, and be sure that you don't puncture the skin. You want to try to get as much as the meat as you can off of it without destroying the integrity of the skin. And after a few minutes, this is what you end up with. Well, a few minutes if you are not an expert at this, and I'm not an expert at this, to be honest. You know, I can do it, but I'm not an expert butcher. If I was an expert butcher, a guy that stands here and does this all day, they'd be laughing at me, saying, "Hey, you could do this in 60 seconds." Okay, I can't do it in 60 seconds, but it can be done. So you get it down here. You'll see there's this one other bone that runs along the leg here. You want to take a knife and run between these two bones, and you want to get this other one off, because this is going to be that nasty little sharp splinter bone that you get in the meat. So work this off, get it out of there. Okay, that's trash. And see another tendon lurking. I'm going to scrape down the bone a little bit more. Get rid of all those tendons, including when you went through the meat here. You needed to pull out any tendons that you saw. Now it's got this flap, solid piece, nice skin with the bone sticking through it. Now we're going to put this off to the side and repeat the entire process for another duck leg or two, or however many you're making. This meat goes into a bowl, and we'll come back and process this later. It's just a matter of starting all over again. And it's time to make up the filling. First thing I'm going to put in here is the walnuts and the onions, which I'm sure by now, even for an experienced butcher, has had plenty of time to cool down while you took care of those duck legs. So we're going to grind this up a little bit first. This is chopping those walnuts will be the hardest part. Okay, now I've got that thyme and sage, freshly picked thyme and sage. I'm going to throw in, along with the carefully picked duck meat from both two of the legs. Add an egg yolk, and just a little bit, like maybe a tablespoon or so of breadcrumbs, dry breadcrumbs to this, because duck is very fatty, and you want it to, any fat that's in there, you want it to be absorbed. And after you scrape down the sides a little bit, you're in a better position now to judge how much salt and pepper to put in. Don't forget to season it. Okay. And the last round. Now we transfer this to a bowl, and sometimes, despite your best efforts, you'll see a little tendon, or maybe even more than one, that's on the surface there. Obviously pick those out and get rid of them. Those will be the tough bits when you're done. I did a pretty good job. I don't see any here, but you may see some, so get them out of there. I'm going to cover this with cling film and refrigerate it. This will be much easier to work with when it's colder. For the tricky part. This has been chilled for about, I don't know, hour and a half. I've got some plastic spread out, and I'm going to grab one of these boned out duck legs. Now the skin, of course, just slides up and down on the bone now because I took everything else out. So the key here to doing this well is you have to kind of spread it out. It's kind of disgusting if you think about it, but you want to spread this out over your hand like this, like it was something out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And now you're going to take this meat, and you're going to wrap it around the bone, form it around the bone. This is why you wanted to chill it first, because it's stiff now. It'll be a lot easier to work with. If it's runny, it's just going to run all over the place. You're not going to be able to get it to hold together. Now, how much to use? I mean, ideally, you want to use half of the meat so that you got enough for the whole thing, but that may not be possible. You may have a little bit more meat than you have room for in it. So you just have to play with it a little bit and start folding up the skin. Now, unlike when you do it with a chicken leg, you want the skin to overlap completely. You really don't want that in the duck leg. You want to have very little overlap, because duck leg skin is very fatty and very thick, and if you have multiple layers of it, it's just going to be chewy and nasty here. So this is the trick here, and it is a trick. You got to pack it down and try to seal up the skin without any overlap. Very different from when you do it with a chicken, like I said. The chicken, you can have the skin overlap a couple times. It's not a problem. Here, you got to kind of play with it. If you got a little bit too much filling, take your finger, stick it in, pull out a little bit of the filling. Try to make the seams go together just right so that it latches together. Now, when it's like this is fine, because the rest of the way it's going to seal up on wrapping and cooking. So this is about what we want here. It's kind of bound up like right. Now it's going to go down, seam side down onto the plastic. A little piece here in the back we're going to have to smooth out too, and then we're going to begin wrapping it up with the plastic, of course. And you don't try to do it all in one wrap, because you're gonna have more than one layer of plastic on it. So the first one is just to make sure that the form is roughly right. And it's going to take a little practice to be able to do this smoothly. Now here you can see you've got some of the filling is kind of like leaked, not exactly leaked out, but it's not completely sealed. That'll be okay. When we're done with this, there'll be a mark here, but when we plate it up, we'll plate it up the other side down. It'll be down in the sauce and nobody will see it. So, but you want it, otherwise you want it as clean as you possibly can get it. Now I'm going to tie this up. I'm going to go get some more plastic. I'm going to wrap up some more here. I'll just show you. I did the other one. The other one came out a little better because I didn't have to try to move behind the camera while I was operating. It's always difficult to work and struggle over the top of the camera here. I have no cameraman. This one's really going to be more of a challenge, but it'll be okay in the end. I've wrapped both of them in plastic, 2 layers of plastic wrap. Now I'm going to wrap them up in foil, and as you can see, I used virtually all of the forcemeat filling. There's really nothing sizable left. So these are going to get wrapped in foil, and then they're going to get steamed. Okay, and in here is a steamer basket. As I explained before, you always have a seam when you wrap things in foil. The seam always goes down, because that way moisture can't come up and get trapped in between the layers. Whatever moisture condenses in there has to run back out again. So we begin this timer and come back in about half an hour here. Making this sauce is quite straightforward, and if you're watching my videos, I shouldn't need to show you the obvious step of putting all the ingredients in the pan to reduce it. So I'm going to put 3 cloves. This is called a peak. I'm making a peak with 3 cloves in it. It's a little piece of onion, weighs about an ounce, about 30 grams, and this is going to go into the sauce. Here we have the pot with all of the other ingredients already in it, just beginning to heat. And just put that in. You're going to stir this around a little bit, heat it slowly. You want to keep the temperature somewhere around 75-80 degrees to reduce it down slowly. When it gets like this, if you can see that clearly, it's basically done for this stage. We're going to strain it, and then we're going to we'll heat it up when we actually need it. Reduce it just a little bit more then. This, to get it to this stage at 75 degrees, took over an hour, by the way. Here, just strain it. Now we've got this other pan. When we're actually ready for service, we will whisk just a little bit of butter into this to make it extra smooth and glossy. But this is our sauce now. And when we're actually ready to cook this, I've taken it out of the refrigerator ahead of time for about an hour now. Don't forget, it's completely cooked, so it's not going to spoil. Now it's just a matter of unwrapping it, getting all this plastic off of it, and then once you do that, take paper towel. It's going to have this gel on it. There's this like basically concentrated duck stock, which is what it poached in its own juices when it was wrapped up there. We want to get rid of some of this. Okay. We're trying to dry this out and get crispy skin. We don't need it to have a bunch of moisture on it. It's going to have to burn off first. Okay, now it's like this. Now it goes on to, we put it on a wire rack like this so that it has air that can circulate on all sides, and put it into the oven with a convection fan running. You can hear. And this is what it looks like after 25 minutes. In order to go from this to the crispy skin that you want, you just hit it with a torch. And it goes really easy. And here we have the final dish. Of course, if this was restaurant presentation, I would put some little baby carrots and some greens across here to pretty it up. But this is the crux of the dish here. This is the hard part. To show you what it looks like when it's cut into. You hear the crispness of the skin there. There we have the interior. Also look for my cocktail book, Cocktails of the South Pacific and Beyond, Advanced Mixology, available through Amazon online.